Hello, bookworms. Welcome back to the Bonafide Bookworm. I'm your host, Rachel, and if you're here to read along with me and improve your English. I don't have any updates or reviews today. I did want to mention I'm going to be traveling, so this video is for Tuesday, um, and hopefully I can get next Thursday's done today too. We'll see. My phone yells at me a lot of times because I have so many videos and pictures on it. It's always like, you don't have any more storage. So hopefully it will let me record one more episode before it starts telling me that, and I have to like weed through stuff and get rid of it or whatnot. So we're gonna pick back up with no reviews right now. We're just gonna jump into the book. Untamed Seas by Deborah, Kiley, and Meg Noonan. And when we left off, they were basically like heading into a storm, and Captain John has suggested that they like head more towards the coast. And like I said, I'm not a sailor. I don't know how this stuff works, but it sounds like that's the wrong decision. I'm assuming that it's gonna, when it hits the coast, maybe the storm is gonna be more rough. Maybe there's more chance of hitting like the bottom, like hitting like the waves pushing you down maybe, and like getting a hole in the boat or being drove up on to land. I don't know. I'm not a sailor. Don't know how that works. But it sounds like that Brad and Deb didn't think it was a good idea to go inland. Sounded like they thought they should go further out, possibly, and around the storm. But they're already like in the middle of it, so going back in, I don't think it's gonna work, but we'll see. Mark was super drunk, and he was at the helm for some reason. I don't think they should have ever maybe taken him on, but whatever. And he's gone down below, and now Deb and Brad are trying to steer the boat. Mark is drunk, so he's not very helpful at this point. So it's basically Mark, Deb, and John, because Meg doesn't sail either. So we're picking up on page 63, chapter 4. Once I had the helm and felt the boat careening down the enormous waves, I could see why Mark had been hollering like a maniac. It took all my strength to hold the rudder against the tremendous force of the water. I had seen seas like this on Zargo, but I had never steered through them myself. It was terrifying and thrilling and way beyond anything I'd ever experienced on a boat. Brad called down to tell John he thought we should get the cockpit dodger down before we lost it. John popped his head up and talked to Brad for a minute, then disappeared. He says he can't find the boards that go in the companionway, Brad said. If we take the dodger down, the shutters will let in too much spray. The rigging was vibrating so loudly I could hardly hear what he was saying. Brad offered to take the helm, and I dropped down next to him and stared at the sea. It was all peaks and valleys. There were no straight lines beyond the railing of our boat, and everything was gray. Was this the gray of dawn, or noon, or dusk? I had to stop and think for a minute. Did it matter? I had a vision of what this scene must look like from above, the waves rearing up behind the stern like ferocious animals ready to pounce. When we flew down into the dark canyons between waves, the wind quit and the noise stopped, as if someone had thrown a switch on a simulated storm. Then the wild ride would start again, and we would be hauled back up into the raging seas. I didn't know which was worse, the creepy quiet of the trough or the howling fury of the crest. Through the din, I heard Meg calling my name. I was startled by the sound of her voice. I hadn't seen her for, a day? I felt myself getting angry at John all over again for bringing her along. What good was she? In this weather, we could have used a capable extra hand. When Meg asked Brad if Brad or I wanted coffee, I realized I hadn't had any breakfast. I found Meg standing in the galley wearing one of John's button-down Oxford shirts and a pair of purple sweatpants. "Pretty rough out there, huh?" she said, handing me coffee. The boat pitched and I tried to keep the cup steady. How would you know? I said. Been on deck lately? Meg's eyes registered her hurt and she looked away. Please don't bitch at me, Debbie. You know I wouldn't be any help up there. Oh my God. The boat was free falling again. Meg lost her balance, slammed against the cabin, and landed against the settee. I managed to stay on my feet and went over to help her up. Are you all right? I asked. I'm fine, she said, and jerked away from my hand. I'm sorry, I said. I'm just wiped out. There was a loud crash on deck, and Brad started screaming. I rushed back up and found him staring wide-eyed at the stern. Are you okay? I asked. It's gone. What's gone? I turned to see what he was looking at and realized that the Dow dinghy had been swept away. All that remained on board was a piece of one of the davits. What happened? One wave. Just look at it. Like, bam, Brad said. I didn't see it coming. John came up. When he saw that we had lost the dinghy, he shook his head slowly. Oh man, Newberger's going to shit, he said. He stared at the empty place where the dinghy had hung. He's going to kill me. At noon, our watch ended, and I went to sleep. 4 hours later, Brad and I were back on deck, and conditions were no better. If anything, the wind had intensified, and the waves had become more monstrous. The club foot on the staysail had broken sometime in the afternoon when a wave hit and caused the boat to jibe. J-I-B-E. The staysail had been veined down, and the pressure from the jib, coupled with the water seeping across the deck, had been too much for it. Luckily, the sail itself hadn't been damaged. Once I had the helm, I saw how hard it was to control the staysail. And now that it was getting dark, steering the boat would be even more daunting because we wouldn't be able to see what we were fighting. I told myself the situation was still manageable. We just have to keep cool, do what needs to be done, Brad and I kept saying to each other. But by the time our watch ended at 8, we couldn't hide our exhaustion or our fear. When I got below, I saw Meg pulling on her foul-weather gear. I asked her what she was doing. Going up to help. Are you kidding? It's a nightmare up there. She shrugged and climbed the stairs. I was too tired to think about Meg now. I watched her go and went back to my cabin. Sometime later, I was awakened by John. He was leaning over me and shaking my shoulders, talking so fast I could barely understand him. We got problems. Meg fell and hurt her back. I gotta get to the engine room to try and get the generator going, and I can't leave Mark up there by himself. Brad sat up and started pulling on his gear. What happened to her? John said Meg had unsnapped the tether on her safety harness before coming back down. Just as she unsnapped it, a wave hit and knocked her on the other side of the cockpit. She has this huge bruise, John said. It looks bad. I found Meg on the floor of the aft cabin, lying amidships with her feet braced against one of the bunks. Every time the boat heaved, she winced in pain, but when I asked what I could do, she insisted she was all right. I poked my head into the engine room to see how John was coming with the generator. It was quiet in there, almost peaceful, despite the violent lurching of the boat. John was sitting on the floor drinking a beer. Having a party in here? I said. How's Meg? She's okay. What are you doing? I'm thinking. I thought you were working on the generator. I am. I'm thinking about it. Oh, you better get on deck, John said. I couldn't believe he was sitting there, dry and warm and drinking a beer, and telling me to hurry and get up on deck. I found Brad at the helm with Mark sitting next to him. Oh, thank ye, Jesus, we're saved, Mark said. Miss Whitbread's here. Are you out of your mind? I screamed at him. We're in a gale and you're shit-faced. You're a bigger asshole than I thought. Quit whining, Mark said and struggled to his feet. She's still fucking floating, isn't she? He reeled toward the companionway. He's going to get us all killed, I shouted at Brad. What do you want me to do? Brad shouted back. He was up here with the skipper, for Christ's sake. What am I supposed to do about it? When I took the helm, I had to forget about Mark. Forget about everything but trying to control the boat. With sustained winds close to 60 knots, it was almost impossible to keep the staysail from... Wait, lost my place. staysail from jibbing. When we were on top of a wave, we were all right, but as soon as we dropped into a trough, the wind was blanketed, and the cross seas pushed the boat sideways, causing the sails to flap wildly. One strong jib and our mast could snap. It was getting far too dangerous to keep carrying the mainsail, but we were stuck with it. We hadn't been able to roll the last 25% of the sail into the mast, and would have been almost suicidal to try to take it down now. It took everything I had to keep Trashman upright. When I was at the helm, I was so focused, I didn't have time to be afraid. But when Brad had the wheel, I could see what hell we were sailing through. Incredibly, the wind and seas kept building. The anometer read 66, 67, 68, then moved to 71. The mainmast was vibrating so intensely, it felt as if it might shake the boat apart. By 4 a.m., I was totally wiped out. Brad went below to get Mark and John, but he came back without them. John says he needs a little more time with the generator, and Mark's passed out. I can't wake him up. This is great. How long does it take to fix a generator? We can go a little longer. Give me the wheel. You go get us some coffee. John was coming from the aft cabin when I got below. He asked if I could go back and talk to Meg again. Just try to make her feel better about the weather, you know? Tell her everything is cool. Oh, right, I wanted to scream. Everything's cool. Maybe you'd like me to tell her about the moonlight dancing on the quiet water, or the sweet breeze kissing our sails. How about, hey Meg, the waves look like the fucking Himalayas, and I'm scared shitless, and you should be too. Meg was still lying on the floor. She had been crying. How are you guys doing up there? She said. It's not much fun, but we're hanging in. How about you? I asked. She looked awful. I'll be okay when we get there. After talking to her for a few more minutes, I went back on deck. A short time later, John came up and told us he wanted to turn on the engine. Now? Brad said. I'm worried about Meg, he said. We need to get her to a hospital. I don't know how much more speed we're going to get, Brad said. I've got to charge the batteries anyway, John said. Brad turned the key and pressed the button, and the engine kicked on. Steve Winwood came blaring out of the speakers. Brad and I continued to take turns at the helm as our watch dragged on and on. When we had been on deck for almost 6 hours, Brad went below again to try to get Mark and John to take over. Brad returned alone. John said he needed a few more minutes with the generator, and Mark is still out cold. At that moment, the engine alarm sounded, and John came racing up on deck. He pushed me out of the way and killed the motor. I don't fucking believe this shit, he said. What else can go wrong? We must have burned up another impeller. So we'll fix it, Brad said. Take it easy. I don't know if there's another one on board. John raked his hands through his hair and swore again. Can you come help me look? The light of a storm-dulled dawn leaked into the eastern sky. I had heard things breaking and groaning and ripping through the night. Now I could see the damage that had been done. Trashman had been ravaged. The Dodger was shredded, the anometer torn off, one of the antennas had disappeared, and part of the radiator had been sheared away. Only the Zodiac, lashed to the deck, seemed unscathed. All of a sudden, I felt very alone. I called Brad's name. No answer. I hollered again and again, and finally Mark came up through the hatch. Quit your bloody shrieking. What's your problem? What's my problem? My problem is that I want you and John to get your butts up here right now to stand your watch. John's busy. He's looking for something with Brad. Mark dropped back into the cabin, and I was alone again. Brad! In a few minutes, Brad came up with John. They hadn't been able to find another impeller, and John still couldn't locate the coastal chart for Cape Heratus. So even if we wanted to head for shore, we had no way of setting a course. He had also discovered that the centerboard was jammed. He couldn't get it up or down. You mean it has been down the whole time? I asked. I just told you it's stuck halfway, John said. Well, there's got to be a way to move it manually, I said. I don't know. There's always a way. How do you know? I just know, John, I said. Debbie, maybe there isn't a way on this boat, Brad said. There's always. Debbie, be quiet a minute, will ya? John said. The bottom line is we have to get Meg to a hospital. I'm going to call the Coast Guard and get a course to the nearest port. How do you think we're going to get into a harbor without an engine? I said. Don't you think we'd be better off just riding it out? It's not like Meg is in any danger. Who is the skipper on this boat? John said angrily. It's me, all right. Me. And I'm calling the Coast Guard. Shit, I said after John went below. I know, but what are you going to do? Brad said. All right, we're going to stop there, page 72, about midway down. So, yeah, doesn't sound like his crew is really working out. So, we'll see what happens next time. Like I said, hopefully I can record enough because I will be traveling. So I might miss a day. We'll see. Hopefully I can make it work. But I hope you all have a great day, month, year, wherever you're at. I hope it's great. And I'll see you back here next time. Bye.